when I come in and do when I do a sensory evaluation with a kid, then I will do a standardized assessment where I end up getting scores from caregivers who know them, and those tell me what type of sensory processing style that child has, and so that's kind of like the foundational place to begin to understand it if you want to understand what sensory means a little more specifically. Usually when people say sensory, a lot of times they think of the sensory seekers, because those are the kids who are usually the most visible, because like the name sounds like, they're usually seeking sensation. They might be seeking movement, they might be seeking sound, and so they're the ones who are bouncing off the walls and making a lot of noise, and might be really adventurous with eating and things like that. And also, I guess to back it up one step even more basic than the sensory profiles is that there are, of course, hearing, seeing, smell, taste, touch. You learn about those kind of in school. And then there are other types of senses as well. There's your vestibular sense, which is your inner ear, your sense of balance. There's your proprioceptive sense, which is your deep body, sense of pressure and touch and hugs and squeezes and more so than just light touch, I'm touching something. And then there's your interoception sense, which is your inner body sense of do I need to use the toilet? Am I feeling hungry? Am I angry? Being able to interpret your own body's cues as to what you're feeling. There are probably more senses, but those are usually the senses that I talk about when I'm talking about sensory things. There are 8 of them. And then, so there are these 4 sensory profiles. So the sensory seekers is the first one that I mentioned, and the one that people usually think of. This is not something where it's oh, if a child needs OT, then that means they have a type of sensory profile. Everybody in the world has this type of sensory profile. And I'm also going to make these slides available to you guys. You're totally welcome to take pictures. But I will make these slides available to you guys. Yeah, no, you're good. So, just like somebody wouldn't be oh, I've been diagnosed as an introvert or an extrovert. You just are. Everybody is. Or you might be somewhere along, or you might kind of fluctuate from one to the other. This is just a description of something that everybody is. Everybody processes sensory input. To be a human being, you process sensory input in some kind of way. At the extremes of what's expected, then it might look dysfunctional, or the way in which you're processing it might look dysfunctional or look abnormal compared to what you see in other people. But it's not just having a sensory processing style is dysfunctional, because everybody has one. So sensory seekers, in my cutesy demonstration of what the sensory types are, that's the tall mug. It says big cup, let's fill it up. They're the ones who are they are active about getting what they need, and they have a high tolerance for sensory input. It's easy to kind of go from that to the sensory avoiders, or in this one, the little teacup, because they are also active about getting what they need, but they have a low tolerance for sensory input. So they are the sensory avoiders. They are usually the ones who might be wearing headphones to block out extra noise. Or even if it's not wearing noise-canceling headphones, a lot of adults will keep an earbud in, or keep your hood up, because it kind of diminishes the noise a little bit. Or I see people covering their ears when the jets go over, and they're grown people, because it's really loud and annoying. That might be avoiding a type of sensation that's overwhelming to them. Sensory avoiders could look like the kids who can't focus on what they're doing in class because of other things going on in the room that are overwhelming their threshold for how much sensation they can take in and be able to focus on what it is that they're doing. So these are the 2 types who are the ones that are active, that have active strategies. High tolerance, low tolerance, but both active. Then on the other side of the scale, we have people who are more passive in their strategies for getting the type of sensory input that they need, and still high tolerance, low tolerance. So that's kind of how the chart works. But to explain those a little bit further, I'm going to go from sensory seeking, sensory avoiding, to sensory sensitive. Sensory sensitive kids and just people have a low tolerance for sensory input, and they don't have active strategies. They have kind of passive strategies for dealing with it. So those are often the kids who go into meltdown or go into shutdown when they're overwhelmed, and they might not have any idea why they're doing it, and their body doesn't have good strategies for what to do to help try to get themselves into a better, like, more regulated place, because they're just overwhelmed and that's just like all they know. Then the little cup prone to overflow is how that one's kind of summed up as. And when it overflows, then that's kind of the meltdown or shutdown mode. So that could be kids who like run out of the classroom, or kids who just like sit there and go into total freeze mode because they just don't know what's expected of them and they can't even focus on it. And then the people who are have a high tolerance for sensory input and have passive strategies about it. It's called the big chill vessel in my teacup analogy. Or the sensory missers. They're often the ones who are just like missing what's going on. They usually also get missed, which is an interesting component of it, in terms of when people are like telling me something that they think is a behavior problem and I think is a sensory problem. These are a lot of times the kids who get overlooked because they often look content. They are like sitting there, they're being quiet, they're not, they have a high tolerance, but they're not actively seeking it. So they don't look like the sensory seekers who are fidgeting with everything and, you know, accidentally just kicked another kid because they're flopping around on the carpet. They're just like sitting there, and what the teacher is saying isn't going into their mind because it doesn't have enough sensory input for them to be able to like tune into it, but they're not going to do anything about that. They're just kind of going to sit there and look content and look quiet and look like not a behavior problem. So, but then it might get missed that they're also not getting like the instruction that they need to be getting because they're not connecting with what's being told to them. I had a handy chart that I could have clicked to on the next one, but that shows how it goes from passive to active and low tolerance to high tolerance.
Now, is it common for them to have two sensories?
I was about to say that there are different ways in which all people, not just kids, can have more than just one. Some people really know that they really fit into two categories almost all of the time. Some people are like, well, in the morning, you know, when I was pretty regulated and pretty well rested, I was a real sensory seeker, but then as the day went on, I wore out and my reserves got tapped out and I became more of a sensory avoider. Some people like change across them through the lifespan, like as they get older and you know, have better strategies or things like that. And then some people are just kind of all over the place. Or
Can it differ by sense as well?
Yes, thank you. That's the other one, is that people can totally be like, I am very sensory seeking with movement, but I am very sensory avoidant with noise, or something like that. That's totally a really common thing with people. And again, it's not just that being in one of these categories is dysfunctional, but often when I see a kid who, like, there's not like numbers to like plot on a point here, but if I was plotting on a point, and I saw a kid who was like way down here versus a kid who's like here, then that would be more likely for them to need like some kind of OT help or intervention. Or if I see a kid who's like way up here, then it's like, okay, it's great that your body has a lot of strategies for getting what you need, but it's not great when those look like running away from school and running into the road or things like that. And so it's the points at which they become kind of the extremes of the chart that's when you start looking at some kind of intervention. The types of senses. Those are the 5 that everybody learns in school, and then these are the ones that I mentioned that you probably more likely haven't heard of because they're kind of the more specific ones. Knowing the different sensory profiles and knowing the different types of senses means that you can see more clearly like what it is that could be going on for a child that isn't just, oh, they're behaving badly, or oh, they're doing this because, you know, they don't have clear boundaries, or an adult is, you know, not controlling them well enough, or things like that. Those are some examples of the kinds of things that you might think if you were thinking about it from a sensory informed point of view. I wonder if he might be sensitive to sound, and that's why he's doing that. I wonder if she might be seeking out movement, and that's why she's doing that. And then knowing what developmental norms and age-appropriate expectations can help us be aware of the fact that all kids have sensory needs, like, all day long. And a lot of times I would say that, like, the average is that kids, like, are generally they might be leaning into one of the 4 categories more strongly, but they're kind of generally closer to the middle. Like the average person is going to be generally closer to the middle. They might have some strategies in some situations. They might not have some strategies in some situations. Kids are like born with a generally good sense of like getting what they need at the expense of anyone else around them and any other needs that anybody else has and any other social considerations and anything at all, like, because they'll just start getting their needs met. And it's kind of all that other stuff that builds up across the lifespan as you start to learn, like, no, you can't just run out of the room when you're tired of listening. No, you can't just, lay down on the floor when you don't want to walk over there. Like, those kinds of things kind of get built up over time. But kids usually start with a pretty instinctive understanding that, like, they can do things that make themselves feel better. And so it's kind of a balancing act for adults to not just, like, try to squash that. Because we do want them to, like, grow into adults who can, like, know that they can do things to make themselves feel better. We just want it to be, like, in a way that also takes consideration of other factors that adults are better at considering all the factors of. So, oops, I scrolled too far. I hear the word behavior used almost as vaguely as I hear the word sensory used. It's often used as a euphemism for negative things like behavior I don't like or misbehavior or attention-seeking behavior or inconvenient behavior for this situation, because very rarely is anyone like, we want to talk with you about your child's behavior. They are so wonderful and friendly and kind to everyone they meet, and they behave great. But like the word behave doesn't actually inherently mean misbehavior. Behave just means like how you're being, how you're acting. You've probably heard somebody say the phrase behavior is communication, because it's a catchphrase that's like gaining more traction. Behavior is like early self-advocacy, like I was just describing, with children kind of instinctually having an idea of how to get their needs met. That's because like if you think of behavior, again, not as negative behavior, but just like as going around doing stuff, they go around doing the things that they feel like they need to do and should do and would help them in some way. They might not be like safe because they're like, 18 months old and they have no idea like what is or isn't safe or what is or isn't like wise for other reasons. But it is like a form of early self-advocacy. Before they can even talk to you, then they're telling you with what they do with their body, like what it is that they need or what it is that they think that they need. And then you can kind of, with an adult lens on it, be able to like take that into consideration as you figure out the best way forward. I said, imagine you have like a 9-month-old baby and you're trying to spoon feed them and they keep turning their head away. If you were being like really, really controlling, you might be like, I'm frustrated, they're not eating this food and I'm just trying to feed them and they need food in their body. But that would be like, most people would recognize that would be a really excessive reaction to the baby might be trying to tell you something. It might be any one of like a dozen things. It could be like, oh, hang on, my mouth is still full, I'm still swallowing. Or like, I actually don't like the taste of this. Or it could be like, oh, the dog just ran by and I'm more interested in that. So you kind of have to be a detective and try to interpret what it is that they're telling you with their behavior. But before they have the capacity to communicate in words, they can demonstrate it with their body language and their actions. And then an important sub-point to that is that even children who do have the ability to communicate in words can often lose it in flooded or stressful situations. Language and other higher reasoning functions are often the first thing to go, which is also true for adults and like all people. It's not just kids. When you get stressed out and overloaded, then the part of your brain that's like tapped into your intellect is not the part that's driving the bus. Because of the way that behavior requires that kind of like detective interpretation, then that means that the same behavior can be heavily influenced by what adult is interpreting the situation. Two adults with two different levels of understanding and context on the situation, and in two different adult emotional headspaces, can have completely different opinions on a child's behavior. So if I go into a classroom and watch a child try to interact with peers by like grabbing their toy and running away laughing, then an adult who knows them really well and has known them the whole time, like I'm kind of describing a PSCD situation. So the adult who's known them, their whole time here and knows that they're hoping to get the other kid to chase them and be their friend and play with them. But a new adult to the situation might be like, look how mean they're being, and the other kid's crying and they don't even care, and that's like terrible of them. But the thing that the child did was the same in both situations. It was just what the adult knew and what the adult thought that interpreted how that child's behavior was interpreted. And so then when we take that over into like decisions that we're making throughout the day that influence the child's life, or the peer situation, or all of it, then it's a very powerful position that we have to be interpreting their behavior and kind of naming it or assigning a value judgment to it or things like that, when it could have meant something else. Even if we knew them really well, it could theoretically have meant something else. So we always kind of have to keep that in mind too. Behavior might mean any one of a dozen different things. So when I get I get the privilege of working in a very like one-on-one. When I pull a kid for OT, then it's just me and them, and that's obviously a very different context than a lot of teachers and a lot of subs are coming into, where you have to like take everybody's needs into account in the whole classroom, which can be really challenging, or even just like groups, or trying to juggle the different sensory or behavioral needs of a group of kids. What I recommend, and this is like a little bit of like longer term strategies, so in terms of like subbing for one day, this is not necessarily, you can't necessarily come in and change the way that the classroom is being run, of course. But I do feel like it's good to keep in mind that a really non-OT level of intervention, like not at the level where it's like, oh, this needs to be IEP services and this needs to be, like specific special intervention, but just everybody having a better life intervention level, is to just build in feel-good strategies throughout your day. And sometimes when I'm writing IEPs, I use words like calming strategies or coping strategies, but when I'm talking about it at a more general level, I like to just use the words feel-good strategies. Because, again, those are things that people usually instinctually do throughout the day. They do things that make themselves feel better, and they kind of tend to avoid the things that make themselves feel worse, unless there's a reason why they kind of need to suck it up and do that for like a short amount of time. And even then, you probably try to minimize the amount of time that you have to do it. And so when you're working with kids, you can like explicitly teach this stuff. You can brainstorm coping strategies together. I don't know how Chris is going to do. Oh yeah, this is going to do each one individually. Great. Adults do these things all the time. We stand up and stretch or walk around when we need to move. I jiggle my leg or twirl my pen or put fidgets in my pocket and fidget with them while I am sitting in IEP meetings or know I'm going to be sitting for an extended period of time. I can generally, maybe not if I'm like in the middle of a session with a kid, but I can generally am allowed to go to the bathroom when I need to. I am generally allowed to eat a snack when I'm hungry. Or if I know I'm going to be in a situation where I can't, then I plan ahead and I try to do what I need to deal with that. I am generally allowed to put down a task that is frustrating to me and take a break and come back to it later, or come back to it tomorrow and work on a different thing right now. I can usually talk to my friends or my coworkers or rant or vent about something that's stressing me out. I can usually change the sensory environment that I'm in. I can turn the lights on or off if I need more alertness or if it's too much and my head hurts. I can put on music or I can turn it off if it's stopping me from being able to focus. I can doodle or daydream. I have the privilege of being able to look like I'm not paying attention without other people coming and assuming that I'm not paying attention and telling me that I need to pay better attention. And I can kind of reward myself when I want to. Like, I don't actually have to answer to anybody else about whether or not I get to eat some chocolate or get to, a lot of these things, take a break. A lot of these things get used as rewards, and they're actually kind of just sensory needs. Kids kind of run up against barriers in like many, if not all of those situations. And so I feel like that's where the solution to that is not to say all kids can do everything that they want to at any second, always, just like adults can, because obviously there are good reasons why we have controls on some of those things. But I do think that making it a collaborative discussion where you talk about what kinds of things make you feel good, what kinds of scenarios can you use those things in, which things that make you feel good can you use while you're in class and you need to still stay focused, versus which things that make you feel good can you use while you're outside and you have a break for recess. If running really fast is like really exciting and exhilarating and makes you feel like you've gotten to use all your muscles and get all your energy out, great strategy for recess, bad strategy for math. But we can still come up with ones that fit the different scenarios. So this was originally written to a teacher audience, and that's why I said, oh no, that didn't go back. It just went forward again. That's why I said practicing one each week, because that's the context in which I was thinking of it, which obviously is not the same for a subbing situation. But you can still have conversations with kids about like what is it that would help you when you're feeling this. And it's usually not best to have those conversations at the time when they're already feeling this. It's usually best to have those conversations at the time when they're feeling relatively regulated and can kind of imagine how they would feel. Because if you're already escalated and I'm like, what would make you feel better? I might just be like, I don't know, I'm just feeling terrible right now and I can't have an intellectual discussion about it because I'm losing access to my language capabilities. And so the goal of this being to make space for children to be able to listen to their own body. When the majority of expectations placed on children in a day are often requiring them to ignore their own body. It takes some time to undo that and to raise their own level of self-awareness. This is why I use the terminology feel-good strategies, because I think that calming and coping calming suggests that everyone is up all the time and needs to be brought down, which is not necessarily true, because we know from the sensory missers and the sensory sensitive kids that they might be like below the threshold and they need to be brought up. So I think that calming isn't necessarily the right word in those scenarios. Coping, I feel like, to me, suggests that something has to already be going wrong and you have to be coping with it. Or, like, just your life in general has to be kind of stressing you out and you have to be coping with it. And while that might be true, I don't necessarily want to, mandate that it be true for all kids at all times. That's why I use the word feel-good strategies. This is my kind of step-by-step of taking a brain and body break. I do give some suggestions, like draw a picture, jump up and down, get a drink of water, take big, deep breaths. Those are some things that you could suggest to a kid if they have absolutely no idea where to begin in terms of what it is that might make their body feel better. This question gets asked to me a lot, and it's also the title of the presentation. Is it sensory or is it behavior? And I usually look at the person and I ask, why does it matter? What's the not in a dismissive way, but what is the actual reason for asking? Why does that matter? Does it matter because it's going to change how we respond to the child? Does it matter because it's going to change what supports we give access to them for? A lot of times I feel like the only reason why people are asking is because they think that sensory concerns are valid and behavioral concerns are not, or that sensory concerns are something that they don't really understand and should ask EDIS about, and behavioral concerns are something that they totally have on lock, and it just means that the kid needs to get their act together. I feel like a lot of times that's the reason why people are asking me this, and I would encourage them that if it's a sensory concern, we might know that there's a problem because of the way we see the child behaving. We might investigate what's going on for the child's brain and body to make it difficult to meet that expectation. We might change something. It could be the environment, it could be the expectations, it could be the supports for the child. And we understand that it might take some time. We might need to do some trial and error. Versus if it's a behavioral problem that we're talking about, we might know that there's a problem because of the way that the child is behaving. We might investigate what's going on for the child's brain and body that's making it hard for them to meet the expectation. We might change something. It could be the environment or the supports or the expectations of the child, and then we might understand that it's going to take some trial and error and it might take some time. So when it comes down to it from a perspective, I feel like the education is really important. Learning the things about different sensory processing or different sensory profiles, or what could be going on for the child, having more language to talk as adults about what those things are and what they mean for the child. I think that's all super important. So it's not that asking this question is inherently not important or nonsensical or anything like that. I just think that at the end of the day, once we start trying to piece it apart and see what it is that we can do to help the child get to a place where they can meet the expectations and the expectations that are being asked of them are reasonable, then the end result is going to look pretty pretty similar regardless of which path it is that we decide to name the problem as. Oh, that might be the last slide. Hey, there you go. Do you guys have any questions for me? I managed to do that in 26 minutes. So, but I know that I did that via skimming over everything about sensory processing, which is usually what people want to know the most about. But also, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. As long as I can drink some water first. My interoception is telling me that I'm thirsty.
So I have a question. Way at the beginning, you were talking about active and passive strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So active strategies would look like what exactly, and what would passive strategies?
That's a super great
Just give an
question.
example.
Yes, and I actually have a whole other section that I skipped for time purposes, and instead I'm just going to tell it to you. And if anybody runs out of time and needs to leave, then please do that. Yes, I actually did a post about this recently, and a bunch of people had questions about, like, what does passive strategies even mean? Like, what are you talking about? And so I broke it down into, like, 4 hypothetical kids. A kid who's sensory missing, a kid who's sensory sensitive, a kid who's sensory avoidant, and a kid who's sensory seeking. And before I, like, read about them, then, again, most kids are not actually just one thing. They might move through them throughout the day. They might be one for one type of sense, but not the other. Or they might be, like, 2 or 3 of them. That's all normal and not, like, an inherent sign of being dysfunctional or anything like that. So I'm saying, let's say that there's a particular classroom that has a sensory sensitive kid named Sam. That's Sam the sensory sensitive. And then there is a sensory avoidant kid named Alex. Alex the avoidant. I'll go to this so that you have a visual with it. So I've got the 2 who are both the low tolerance, because you can kind of understand how they can correspond to one another. They both have a low tolerance for sensory input, but one of them is avoidant and one of them is sensitive. So Sam and Alex are both supposed to be doing independent work time, and there's a quiet background noise that's happening. Like maybe there's a fan going and it's like a little bit rattly or something like that. It bothers both of them. They may or may not be aware that it is bothering them, because, especially depending on how young they are. They might not have any idea that what they are bothered by is the sound of a fan going. They just know that it feels wrong in their body and they can't focus on what it is that they're doing. So Alex the avoider sits down to do their quiet independent work time, and Alex is singing and humming to themselves while they're doing their work. And their body is just like instinctually gone, there's a problematic noise. I know what I can do. I can cover that up with a noise that I'm in control of.
Okay.
From the outside, the teacher might be like, all you're doing is contributing to the amount of decibels in the room. Like, this is a problem. But to Alex, they're like, I'm in control of this one. I'm not in control of that one. So this feels less problematic to me because I know I can start it or stop it. I know what it sounds like.
And he's the avoider.
He's the avoider,
Okay.
yeah. And then meanwhile, Sam the sensitive sits down to do their quiet independent work time, and their body just kind of is in like panicky, unfocused mode because all they can think about is the noise. Again, even if they're not thinking of it at like a conscious, like, I hear a noise and it bothers me and I can put that into language level. But it's like my brain can't focus on thing I'm supposed to do. Teacher wants me to do thing. I can't do thing for some reason. I can't even think about why I can't do thing. And so they might just like sit there silently staring at the page. If they're the kind of kid who tends to go into freeze instead of like fight or flight, they might like explode or scream or melt down, which would be kind of the more fighty of the fight or flight or freeze. And then they might like literally elope or run away or, get up and go to some other part of the room. And that does like that obviously then like catches the attention as like looking like a behavioral problem. It also then like makes the conversation about something else, and so what was the precursor might get totally muddled because the teacher is not aware that there was a noise that was bothering them. Sam might not be aware that there was a noise that was bothering them, especially if Sam's like a kindergartner or something. And so, now the teacher's like, oh, every time he's supposed to do independent work, he runs away from the table, and nobody knows the thing that we have to back it all the way up to, right? So then I did a similar comparison between sensory seeker and sensory misser, which also, sorry to back it up for one more second, Alex might also get reported as a behavioral problem because they'd be like, I talk with Alex and I'm like, hey, are you supposed to sing when our voice is at a level 0 and we're doing our independent work? And they're like, no, you're not supposed to sing. And you're like, okay, so, but you're singing. And they're like, oh, okay, I won't sing anymore. And then they go back to it and they start singing again. And you're like, no, he knows the rule. He told me he knows the rule, and he's just breaking the rule. And it's like, he's just going into his body's, like, instinctual, this is how I solve this problem.
Soothing kind of thing?
Yeah, or so that's really like a very like active strategy in the sense of like I'm covering up the sound with a different sound, but it could totally be in a different situation. It could totally be just like I'm doing something that makes myself feel better when I have to tolerate this uncomfortable thing. So if he started rocking back and forth or something like that that wasn't actually covering up the sound, wasn't doing anything to solve the sound, but it does make him feel better enough that he can tolerate the sound, but then he's still not doing his work. So everybody's like, why is he not doing his work?
And then you have a teacher who's sensory sensitive while your sensory avoider is humming.
Yep, exactly. Yes, and then the adult sensory profile gets mixed into the mix, and it's like, absolutely. So then I've got my hypothetical classroom with sensory missing Max and sensory seeking Sage, and they're both supposed to sit quietly with their hands in their lap and crisscross applesauce and have, whole body listening while the teacher instructs the whole group about something. And both of them have a high tolerance for sensory input. And it's not only just their tolerance in terms of like what they can handle before they melt down, but it's also like how much is needed to engage their brain. And so neither of them are taking in anything that the teacher is saying because this teacher is not being super engaging and is not using visuals and is just like standing there lecturing at them for some reason. And so both of them are just like all that's going in one ear and out the other. But sensory seeking Sage is like, okay, well, I'm going to wiggle and I'm going to fidget with the rug and whoops, I accidentally pulled a thread out of the rug and half the rug is gone. And I accidentally hit a kid in the face because I was wiggling, and then Max is probably just sitting there zoning all the way out. Like Max is like, this was not engaging enough for my brain to click with it, so I will sit here and smile and be quiet because those are the things that I'm supposed to do. And that's why those are often the kids that get missed, because unless they're like missing so much that it's like impacting them academically to the point where, like they aren't learning the literacy and the math skills and stuff like that, then it might just be like, oh yeah, they're really quiet and content and they're good in class and the behavior, and it just all went right over their head. Versus sensory seeking Sage, who they're probably like, Edith, please come stop this child. He ripped up the rug and he hit another kid 37 times and we don't know how, he has to sit over on a little circle by himself, and it's like, it gets out of control really fast because he's doing his best to try to get his mind to be engaged. He's like, what can I do to pay attention to what's happening right now? I really would like to be parting of this class, but that's too wiggly.
When does the sensory seeker burst?
Can you
how
clarify a little bit?
much, like, if they're already seeking,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know whenever they're
Or do you mean like how can you tell whether it's dysfunctional or just like being a kid?
Yeah.
That's tricky because the threshold is further down the line than what school demands are. is the problem. In a world where there's no no school and no systems that the kid has to be in, then like running and playing and jumping and climbing stuff and wiggling all the time would not like be a problem. Like the reasons why that is a problem is like constraints that we've put around them. And so that becomes a really tricky one to parse out and to try to help come up with strategies that like fit into like the classroom setting, and are like okay for them to be engaging in. I don't know whether there's like a easy way to tell whether or not it's like past the point of dysfunction versus within normal expected development. I do think that if the kid is like, I have had times where a child like doesn't actually even seem like they're enjoying themselves anymore. Like in the action room, it's like I don't know if you've been in the action room, but it's like there's stuff to climb on, there's stuff to jump on, there's stuff to, and I've had kids who almost seem like desperate, but they're not like getting there, you know, like they like, hey, this is, you know, right, this is an area where you can presumably meet those needs, and it's like, oh, this isn't even enough, you know, how much amount of time would need to be enough, and so then you kind of try to build things in throughout the day, build breaks in throughout the day, or build sensory input in that they have that can help their mind stay alert, that doesn't require like outburst level. Because also sensory seeking gets tied a lot to movement as a sense, but there's a lot of other senses that we can target too. So like, you know, obviously chewing gum at your desk is not going to cause as much movement or disruption as dancing at your desk, you know, just in like literal practical terms. And so so you kind of start trying to focus on some of the other things that you can build in without having to necessarily only be movement.
Are sensory seekers typically the runners?
Can also be avoiders.
Okay.
Pretty commonly. Well, can also be sensitive because then they're just going into flight mode, and it's not like being used as a strategy. It's just like I am in overwhelm and I get away, because people's bodies do also have like the flight, fight, freeze, different kinds of reactions, and so someone who's in flight might not be like, if they're running because they're like, I really love to run, then they're probably a sensory seeker. If they're running because they're like, something terrible is happening over there and I'm getting away from it, then they might be an avoider. And if they're running because they're just like, I don't know, man, everything's bad and I'm out of here, then that's probably sensitive. If only I could like telepathically get all of the kids to tell me exactly what it is that they're thinking, then I could probably parse it out a little more specifically. But
do they ever, I guess, the outburst is what I was kind of getting at, as sensory seekers. You know how, like, sensory avoiders or sensory sensitive might seem like they explode all of a sudden because it builds up. Do sensory seekers ever seem to, like,
they can definitely
have, like, a meltdown?
Yeah, they definitely. All types of kids can melt down or shut down. Especially because there's blended styles, and you know no one fits neatly into boxes as much as Facebook images would suggest. You can. I feel like I'm trying not to be too jargony. A lot of times when I'm working with a real sensory seeking kid, or when I'm with my own children at home who I'm the mom of, then I will like roughhouse or do a really, really intense, sensory input activity for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then transition after that into a really calm activity, while knowing that the first 5 to 10 minutes of the transition are probably going to be garbage. So like before bedtime, then we'll like run and play with my own kids who I'm the mom of. We'll like run and play and roughhouse, and then we'll stop. And I'll kind of just sit on the couch, because I used to try to go straight into reading a book, and that was always absolute nonsense. And so, and I'll sit on the couch, and they'll like kind of climb all over me, but I'm being calm with my body, and then eventually it'll settle in for them, and then eventually they'll calm down too, and then we'll read a book. A lot of times, people will try to be like, oh, well, this child is sensory seeking, so therefore we will just do off-the-charts sensory things all day long, and you can overwhelm a sensory seeking kid. Their bodies can go into overwhelm too. It's just a lot of times if it's like higher than the kind of 15 to 20 minutes is like a great little like bite-sized like piece, and then that like helps the body like regulate and settle and be able to focus on something. So I would say yes, one way in which, you know, kids who are sensory seeking can go into overload or meltdown could be like, you know, if you're doing something that's supposed to be fun, like going to an amusement park or going on a outing or something like that, and it's like we're doing big great things all day long, it can still go into overload and meltdown if there's not like breaks built in, or you know, taking time to regulate in the middle of that too. It's not just the infinite threshold upward.